So, did you grow up with anxious parents? If so, today's episode is especially for you, although I believe it's for anybody that deals with or suffers from anxiety, and not the good kind, which is something we're going to explore in this episode with Dr. Friedemann Schaub. He's got 2 books out, The Fear and Anxiety Solution, and his newest, The Empowerment Solution. It's a 1-2 punch that I think anybody who deals with anxiety or grew up with those anxious parents would benefit from reading to or listening to. Enjoy this conversation with myself, Dr. Friedemann, and Dr. David Leicken.
Find and learn from people who lived it wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from people who lived it.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Well, welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. I have to be honest, Dr. Dave, and I see you down there in the corner. The other doc that we've got on this show today, he's got a story that speaks to me. He grew up with really anxious parents, and it's an interesting thing how the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Because when you grow up that way, there's this bit of anxiety that's inevitably going to get passed along. And then I've been diving into like his work, and then I'm gonna do this here really quick. I'm gonna throw up, this is the book right here, his newest book that just came out a couple of years ago called The Empowerment Solution, 6 Keys to Unlocking Your Full Potential with the Subconscious Mind. Man, I listened to a few of the podcasts with this guy, and I'm thinking, this is the kind of person that we need to continually strive to have on our podcast, because as I said to him before we got started, it's his story that is using to help other people. And then you know what happens, right? We all find a piece of ourselves in those stories, and we relate to them, and then we go, me too. Okay, I could do that as well. So first and foremost, Dr. Dave, welcome back to Learn from People Who Lived It.
Good morning, Matthew. It's a pleasure to be here as always. Let me move my mic a little closer here.
Yeah, and then Dr. Friedemann. He wants me to just call him Friedemann, so I'm going to call him Friedemann, which it means man of peace, I learned. Is that correct?
That's right, man of peace.
What's it like to be a man of peace growing up?
I'm still finding that out. Oh, growing up. You know, that was the name my parents gave me because they thought I bring peace to the family that was pretty dysfunctional, fighting a lot with each other. The first daughter, who was or is still super sensitive, didn't really help a lot. So they thought, well, maybe there is another one who gonna fix it all. So that was me. So if you want to have a purpose right from the first moment that you're born, I got it for sure.
I want to get right to it because, like I said, your story is one that I think is going to speak to a lot of people. And specifically, man, anybody who grew up with anxious parents should key in a little bit, listen in to this thing a little bit closer. So why don't you set the table for us first, Friedemann, and tell us a little bit of the background.
You know, I thought about it before our talk today that on paper, my family was not really a problem. They were both the doctors of a small village. So they were highly revered. Everyone needed them. You know, at some point, I think my dad had delivered, 15% of the village himself. So there was like really old-fashioned doctoring. But underneath that all, there was a constant anxiety that my parents were dealing with, and that came from their background as, the generation of the Second World War. My mother was, 12 or 13 when they had to flee Eastern Germany at that time, Prussia, from the Russians. They lost everything. She lost her older brother in the war. So they had to start all new. So there was already this huge fear of the shoe going to drop, something bad's going to happen, because they didn't see that coming. And my father was the only son of a woman who raised her children by herself, which was also pretty rare. And he had, so my grandmother had 4 children, 3 girls, and my father was the youngest. And he also was in the Second World War as a 17-year-old boy. So he had gone through a lot. He was in a French prison camp, almost died there, was able to flee. His friend that he actually ran away with, just basically by a hair, he got shot in the attempt to flee. So my father made it. So there was also some survivor guilt. I mean, there's a lot my father couldn't talk about until he was really in his 60s or late 60s. And then finally he opened up, and I write a little bit about this in the book. But I think what was both of my parents' driving was uncertainty. They were always afraid that something bad's going to happen again. And I remember when they're in the 70s, there was this conflict between Israel and Egypt, and they were certain it's going to be Third World War. And they had really already, the whole basement was full with food and water, and they already said, okay, so if there is a world war and the Russians are coming, then we have to for sure, create like a little hospital here in the backyard. And I mean, they told me all these stories, and I was like 7 or 8 years old, and that imprints on you. You really believe something can happen at any moment. You're never safe. And I developed two kinds of anxiety. One anxiety was the anxiety about the unknown, which I kind of compensated for with obsessive-compulsive behavior. And my go-to, there were two go-tos. One was that I was compulsively praying about 100 times a day and just, pleaded to God that my father doesn't have to go back into the war, or that there's nothing bad happen, or that my parents don't actually get a divorce because they were fighting all the time. And the second was that I straightened carpets. So when there was a carpet not really straight, I was pretty sure something bad's going to happen. So sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night, looked at all the carpets, and unfortunately my parents were collectors of carpets. I had to make sure all of them were lined up. And at that time, I was maybe about 12, 13 years old. And then the second anxiety was an anxiety that was more personal. So I didn't have to save the world there. I had to save my own skin, which was about performance. And when I was in middle school, which I barely got into, my parents gave me this spiel that I'm late bloomer. Pretty much they didn't know if I was intelligent or not, but they thought you definitely have to go to middle school and you have to go to high school because you have to be a doctor eventually. And so I was kind of waking up to the fact that I have to study. I'd never studied before. And I didn't really know how to study. My parents didn't have time to study with me. And so I had really bad grades right at the beginning. And there was one time where my father flipped out that I had such bad grades, but he didn't want to deal with it. And so it was up to my mother, who was kind of the kind person in the family, to read me the riot act. And I really remember this trauma, the shock of when I was berated for, it felt like hours, but it was probably just 30 minutes. But, when you're shrinking more and more with every word that you were thrown at, with everything that your mother tells you about this future that you will have, which will be horrible because you're never really going to amount to anything if you're not stepping up. And what are you doing to us to fail in school? And so that made me realize I'm only conditionally loved. Only if I have good grades, I can have acceptance. If not, I'm doomed. So then the second anxiety got started and got worse and worse, where I really felt unless I am, the best in my class, I will be chastised. And so I couldn't sleep at night before tests. I was, taking already some kind of sleeping pills my parents gave me when I wasn't able to find rest. I became really a nervous wreck in this regard. And then there was always, this in the background of never knowing when my father will stop talking to the family or throw furniture around or, get really into one of those violent rages. And so there was, just a lot to juggle. And that made anxiety so normal that if someone would have asked me, do you have an anxiety problem? I probably would say no, because it was, for me, just, this is how it is. This is just, my state of being. And it took me a while to wake up to realize, oh, this is actually a lot of anxiety. And this is not normal. This shouldn't be like this when you're a child.
Friedemann, thank you for sharing that. I want to go to Dave. You don't know this about Dave, but Dr. Dave has spent the last 20 years working with veterans in our community who have seen war firsthand and then come back. And so, Dave, inevitably, you've got thoughts, feelings, and opinions on what he's just shared because, yes, World War II was a long time ago, but there's been conflicts and wars since then that have had impacts on families. And I would imagine other families have had to live through some of this stuff that Friedemann talks about.
Yeah, I'd love to touch on some of the generational stuff. What gets inherited is kind of a tolerance for novelty, right? So different people have different tolerances for novelty. Either they'll approach it with curiosity or they'll approach it with fear. And you can see this in young kids, even before you're talking about like what you've learned from your parents. Some kids are naturally curious and will go towards something new, and some kids will, run and grab their mother's leg, because something is new or different in their environment. So you have that as a genetic factor that gets inherited along. But then when you have a family member, parents that have lived through wartime, and who can predict, when another nation is going to invade your town, or that you have to grab whatever you can and flee. That's such a life-shattering event to go through, and the fear and, witnessing trauma of neighbors or family members getting killed or beaten, and things like that. You start to orient your whole life afterwards around trying to anticipate like what threats might be around the corner and trying to prepare for any eventuality. And the reality of most trauma is, as bad as it may be, it's generally a one-time thing. And if you did nothing different the entire rest of your life, you'll probably never experience anything that bad again. But people build up these patterns around, avoiding things that trigger and kind of a constant surveillance, looking for any irregularities in the world around them that might indicate that something terrible is about to happen again. Now, I say that, there are certain high crime neighborhoods where trauma is endemic. There are war-torn countries where trauma is endemic, right? So there are situations where you do have to prepare for, another horrible event coming. But for most people, that's not the case.
How old were you, Friedemann, when you started to learn about like, okay, maybe this isn't the way it has to be for the rest of my life? Was there a moment? Was there a thing that happened, or did you just have a come to Jesus moment with yourself and figure it out? Can you walk us to that point?
Well, I think the obsessive-compulsive behavior that actually disappeared by itself at some point. And I think it coincided with a change in my belief system. So, in some ways I grew up with the idea that there is some, punishing God who is a piano tuner, and unfortunately reinforced to me when he said, well, and I was again 12, 13 years old, he said to me, well, I'm a very Christian man and I know God, and I tell you one thing, God will test you one day and you better be ready for that test. And I don't know if this guy had kids himself, but that was the worst he could have told me. So that just reinforced this belief that I better shape up and, plead to God. But eventually I changed that belief. And I think it had to do also when I got older that I did choose to believe in more benevolent force, not necessarily the Christian God, but just, force that was not out to get us or test us, but really support us, whether it's true or not. But that's what I, came to the conclusion and chose to believe. And that eased me a lot. And then I gained more confidence in myself. I mean, eventually I realized also, okay, so it's not about carpet straightening. It's actually about, having a good head on my shoulders. And one thing that I realized is, even though, I wish this on nobody to have single-handed to, save the parents' marriage, but I did a pretty good job. And so I did realize that it gave me some confidence that I was this, negotiator or diplomat between two, very stubborn sides that somehow, after hours and hours and talking to them, came together. And, one time my father even asked for forgiveness, which was totally unheard of. So I felt good about myself. So I trusted myself more. And then there was this one thing that I kind of replaced the OCD with, which was, I know there is a plan B. And so even if plan A doesn't work out and something bad's going to happen, I know I can come up with plan B. And that was a sense of this problem-solving resilience that I had developed at some point.
Yeah.
Dave, will you touch on OCD just a little bit from your vantage point? I'm sure it's something you've dealt with a lot. Maybe you can add some color to what he just shared.
Just listening to what you're talking about with, kind of evolving out of this. We've touched on this on other shows where you kind of learn how to handle situations with the tools that you have at the period of time in your life, right? So as a child, your resources are limited, your perspective is limited. You get a lot of your perspective from your parents. And so you try to navigate and manage those things with what you have available to you. And as you mature and have more experiences and develop more tools, then you start seeing different ways of looking at the situation and maybe seeing patterns from your childhood that don't make sense anymore. There's a situation that I've noticed quite a few times with OCD and trauma, and I don't think it's really talked about in DSM in this way. Usually people discuss OCD as really not having a specific origin, or, it's just kind of something that happens to people. But I've seen an interesting pattern over the years with some folks that have experienced trauma. And the way I understand it is you experience something that you had no ability to predict, and it shattered your illusion of the world as a safe place. Right? You just kind of assume that the world is a safe place and that you're fine and you can go from point A to point B and get there without any trouble. And then this terrible thing happens. And now all of a sudden the world is unsafe and you're not sure where it's unsafe or to what extent it's unsafe. And that becomes so overwhelming that I've seen people get into OCD, obsessing about little things that they can control or think that they can control, as a substitute for worrying about the big things that they have no control over, right? So it's kind of like you take all that anxiety about the uncertain world around you and you focus it on these little things that really are insignificant and irrational in a lot of cases. And it's a substitute for that. And it makes sense to me hearing your story that as you're gaining other skills and gaining other perspectives, that the OCD would tend to melt away because you don't need it anymore.
Is that how people can, I feel like that's almost this breakthrough knowledge that people could learn in this episode of Learn from People Who Lived It, is like eventually it gets to a stage where you don't need it anymore because you figure out that you don't need to control it. And so I maybe the question that I want to ask both of you is, ultimately, should people who have this obsessive-compulsive disorder, should they really start to examine why they need to control the things they need to control? Would that be a strategy or a step in helping them uncover it?
It's tough because a lot of times the thing that drives it feels so large and so unmanageable that they don't even want to look at it. And so a lot of that fear that's driving the OCD is largely outside of conscious awareness. So I guess the first thing, if somebody's able to do that, is say, what is it that I'm really afraid of? And try to take it from that point. But I love the idea of okay, I have plan A, but there's also a plan B. And if plan B falls apart, I have enough confidence that I'll be able to improvise and figure something out, right? Mm-hmm. So once that clicks in your brain, that goes a long way toward dispelling anxiety. And, there's a fine line between being prepared and then just living in constant fear. I've always been of the mindset that it makes sense to be prepared in a reasonable way. Right. So I like to go driving out in the desert, and usually I'll go with other people. But where I go out into the desert, there's no 911. There's no cell signal. Right. So you have to think in terms of what would I need to call 911 for? And how can I reasonably bring that along with me in my truck as I'm going out into the desert? So I have beefed up first aid kit with some trauma supplies in it. I have a 10-pound fire extinguisher. I have two-way radios in many cases, right? So you try to figure out supply of water, right? So you try to figure out, like, what can I reasonably do to mitigate the things that I can reasonably see coming, and then let me trust that I'll be able to figure it out if shit goes sideways.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
Can I go to you now, Friedemann, and talk a little bit about, in your book, The Empowerment Solution, there's 6 keys to unlocking your full potential. And, I think it's safe to say that if you're being held back by anxiety or OCD or something like that, it's really difficult to unlock your full potential. Maybe next to impossible for some people. So can you walk us through, not all 6, but a couple of the keys that might be a really great starting ground for people to start to unlock their full potential? What was critical for you to learn and put into practice that might help other people?
I mean, this is kind of, if you would say there is part 1 and part 2, this is part 2. Part 1 was really the fear and anxiety solution. And I think that first book was what I learned about healing my own anxiety. And then part 2 is the empowerment solution, which is kind of, now what? So when it comes to the OCD, for example, what I believe is that what you just said, Dave, that there is a powerlessness and we want to have a sense of control, and the OCD gives you a sense of control. Now, what I found is that a lot of people that I work with that had been dealing with OCD had been unfortunately so identifying themselves with the OCD. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is my problem, that they kind of lost sight on anything else that actually could give them a sense of, trust in themselves or empowerment. And so the shift that I observed happens when people are able to not only understand where the OCD may come from or what the purpose is, and also realize that the OCD has a secondary benefit, because it feels damn good when you're straightening 50 carpets and you feel you're accomplished. Yes, I did it. The world is safe. And so most OCD has some kind of a little relief to it once you do it, once you, we're able to lock the door 20 times and then feel like, okay, now I really did it, or checked on the stove 50 times and now I really know it. So that relief is also almost like an addiction, and
It's reinforcing.
and that needs to be also addressed. But with the empowerment solutions, the goal was for me to help people to not only feel less anxious or feel more confident, but also see that there are these reinforcing patterns that we have in life that make us unfortunately anxious again. We live when we are anxious. I believe we live in a form of survival mode, because anxiety is about avoiding danger.
Right.
And the survival modes that I observed, and there are others, but the ones that I see are very common, are either the avoidance mode or the pleasing mode. And so let's say you're healing your anxiety, you're feeling good, the root causes have been addressed, the trauma has been at least talked about or resolved, but then you still go into your avoidance mode because that's what you know. You hide out, you make yourself smaller, or you procrastinate around anything that's uncomfortable or could cause failure. And, another avoidance mode can also be that you are going still in this victim mindset, that you're, feeling like the whole world is against you. Yes, I'm not feeling anxious anymore, but there's definitely people that are out to get me. And so I need to, watch for that. So these kind of modes recreate anxiety, because, the anxiety, the emotion is the fuel for those patterns. So what I found in, having now done this for over 20 years, that people that really were good came back and told me, well, here it is again. I don't know why. And what they haven't really changed were the way they showed up in the world. And we need to have a little bit of a different blueprint in order to do that.
Anything you want to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, it's interesting. The longer you practice a pattern, the more distanced you become with the thing that originally kicked it off in the first place. And by the time you get 10, 20 years into OCD or any other pattern of behavior, you have no idea why you're doing it anymore. You just do it automatically. And that fear of, well, if I don't do this, something terrible surely is going to happen. That fear is so immediate that it kind of keeps you locked into those patterns, and finding a way to break out of that so you can even take a look at it, or even stop and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Like, where did this even come from? Being willing to take a look at that and being willing to at least ask that question, I think, is one of the earlier steps to starting to unlock it a bit.
So one of the things that I'd love to chime in, and as I'm listening to you guys talk, and thank you, we're getting like a master class right now on anxiety and all the ways to, potentially start to unwire it. And you just said something, Dave, that really kind of got me fired up, which is you got to look at it. And I know that for me, when life was at its like peak of feeling the messiest and like it didn't make any sense, one of the things that I did was I learned Transcendental Meditation. And this meditation practice was what it did for me outside of saving my life was it slowed my brain down long enough for me to be able to look at things from a completely different perspective. We've talked about this several times on the show. Like I love the term survival mode because I tell people that I lived in survival mode for years. And the problem with that is like, your brain is just on freak out mode and it can't settle down long enough to make rational, calm decisions. And so I'd love for you, Friedemann, to speak to the power of meditation, maybe specifically, but the power of working with the mind to slow it down long enough to see what you need to see, because it's my belief, and there's some famous quote out there that I'll butcher, but the quote says something like, there's nothing that couldn't be fixed by going and sitting down in another room for a couple of hours, and just getting quiet and figuring that piece out. So give me your take on the power of meditation, looking inward to help you unravel this anxiety.
I think, I do often predominantly work with the mind and especially the subconscious. So I use a lot of techniques that help people to go into a deeper place. So now when you go in meditation, you go into a place that, slows everything down, opens you up, and you're able to, just drop into a state of mind that kind of the noise drops away and you're able to have greater clarity. It's harder. It's a practice that, you probably take some people years to get there. Now, when you go in something like hypnosis, for example, that is a little bit easier in regards to someone is guiding you. Someone is helping you to go to a state, an alpha or delta or whatever state, a deeper state where you just feel like, okay, now I can, from a different perspective, look at what happened to me. I don't have to re-engage. I don't have to re-traumatize. I can be in a safe distance, but I'm able to look at the things and even tap into memories that I had forgotten a long time. A lot of the people I'm working with saying, wow, I haven't really thought about this forever. And there it comes up. So there is really some power in that stillness and that slowing down, because it does access the deeper part of the mind. It's kind of, circumvents the analytical, rational mind that often tries just to have an explanation or an answer, and then it just, winds itself up because there is no direct answer or explanation. And so when we are just getting this out of the way and we are tapping more into this also visceral experience that just gives us a sense of, maybe resolution that we hadn't before. I mean, so many people that I've worked with had, traumas, especially abuse. And, when you have been abused, you do feel like, this is something that you will never be able to shed because this marks you forever. This is who you are. And being able to see it now from another perspective, not only them as survivors, but them also as the ones that, because of the abuse, they're extra caring and extra careful in how they treat others. And that, their ability to have compassion, and a lot of those people are in relationships or have even kids their ability to really discern and say, I'm not just passing on what was done to me, I'm actually doing the opposite. They don't see how much they grew and how they are ultimately bigger and better and, stronger than what happened to them until they are guided to that place of being able to evaluate this. And that shifts them out of the entrapment of the past into stepping into the empowerment of the now. And that's why I think, a slower mind, meditation. I also really believe in journaling, especially journaling as a regular practice. But then also, those subconscious methods, they do help a lot just to see and then lose the fear of what we are seeing. Because when you're thinking about anxiety, so many people don't want to get near it. They rather distract themselves. They rather do something completely different because it feels so scary to even have to feel the anxiety. Then thinking about where the anxiety comes from feels double scary. And so when we are losing that fear and changing it to more a sense of curiosity, I know the anxiety doesn't want to harm me. It wants actually to protect me. It's not something that's going to kill me. It's actually something that just wants to alert me that there is something unresolved. So let's be curious about what that is. Just a little bit of a different mindset can also open, us up to step into that, that wanting to find out where did this all come from.
And I feel like, and Dave, I'm going to give you a chance to say something here, but I think to a lot of people it can feel counterintuitive, especially if you're like me and you're a problem solver and you want to fix things. Somebody telling you to go to and sit there, it feels like, well, hold on a second, I want to do something, and it's hard to get people to buy into the fact that you are doing something by doing nothing. Like it's a really, it's a hurdle I think that people have to jump over. But Dave, I want to give you a chance to kind of pile on to what he said.
Yeah. Well, just to comment on what you just said, it's the sharpening the axe situation, right? So if you're sitting down, you're allowing your brain to step away from the immediacy of the anxiety and to let things gel a bit and get some clarity. It's like sharpening the axe. You can keep whacking away at the wood with a dull axe, and you're going to be putting a lot of effort in, making very little progress. If you just take a moment, step away from it, sharpen the axe, and go back, you'll find that the process goes a lot quicker and smoother, and with less, hard work behind it. A couple of things that jumped out at me. Mindfulness. Mindfulness practices give you the ability to create space. So with anxiety, the immediacy of it, you are going to tend to react instinctively and go into avoidant patterns, or maybe become aggressive, or do something to get away from the immediacy of it, because it feels like life and death, but it's not life and death. It's just your brain telling you that. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of how pain signals work. If you stub your toe, you feel pain. Well, the pain is there specifically to draw your attention to the situation and to do something to fix it. Anxiety, I think, ultimately is your brain telling you that there's a life-threatening danger. Well, when that starts to malfunction and you're getting anxiety signals over things that are not dangerous, it's kind of lost its benefit. And finding the ability to create space to be able to look at it is important. Practices like meditation are difficult to get started, but as you continue to do it and you become better at it, you learn how to tone down the immediacy and the clutter that's inside your mind. And that also then works with anxiety. So if you start to feel anxious, you can say, okay, I need to step back from this for a moment instead of just immediately doing something. So anything that creates space, I think, is a good way to start to get a handle on it.
I want to move us into a couple of different areas here, and I want to talk about anxiety's impact on our self-esteem. And the reason that I want to have this conversation is because of the simple thing that I talk to a lot of people about, which is until you feel better about yourself, you will not take care of yourself. And until you take care of yourself, it's going to be really tough to sort of move the needle on anything that you want to accomplish in your life. And I would venture to say that, one of the keys to unlocking your full potential is to start to believe in yourself. And a piece of that is taking care of yourself. And if your self-esteem is low, we see it all the time with people who have really low self-esteem. They don't help themselves. They don't do anything for themselves. They don't think they're valuable enough to do anything for themselves. So I just wanted to set that up. And Friedemann, I'm going to let you go ahead and jump off on this, but I wanted to explain to people why I'm bringing this up, because I know for me, I didn't take care of myself for a long time because I didn't see my value. That's low self-esteem. When I started to understand that I mattered, I started to pour into myself, and it was really cool to kind of watch what would happen from that. So speak to anxiety's impact on self-esteem, Friedemann.
Well, I mean, personally, I had a very conditional self-esteem. So my anxiety basically made me believe, as I said before, my productivity or my accomplishments, that's what I need to have in order to have a right to feel good about myself. So I think a lot of people that deal with these kind of belief systems, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not capable enough, they do then compensate with, being overachievers or, trying really hard to, modulate their insecurity and also their anxiety. But it's, of course, like another drug, because, you have accomplished something and immediately the bar goes higher up, or immediately you're saying like, well, yeah, that was just luck. Or one time I did a speaking class, and so you had to basically talk in front of all these people, and then they give you feedback, and I got pretty much 99% good feedback for what I was talking about. And I talked about my childhood. And then one person said something, it was too long-winded or boring or whatever. And that's the one I was focusing on. That's the one, of course, who was right, and all the others were just like out of their mind. Or, as I used to say to my parents, I wondered if they are paying my friends off or if they are actually really liking me, because there was always a little bit of a doubt. So my self-esteem was, as I said, all about doing perfect and doing well. And at some point, I mean, I, became like, a physician in Germany, in university hospital. I published, some really nice stuff. And so I felt good in the moment. My boss, who was, a well-known professor, kind of, liked me and put me under his wings. But the problem was that I was still anxious. The good feelings, my self-esteem lasted, maybe as long as someone gave me positive feedback, and then it just crumbled in an instant again. So it wasn't really there. And you said, you didn't take good care of yourself. I didn't either. I did really take well care of everything I was supposed to do. But I, as a physician, was drinking too much. I took beta blockers for my anxiety because I thought that's going to help me. I definitely ate way too much, and I smoked on top of it. So you can imagine my self was not really in the forefront of my mind. And one day I woke up with severe panic attack. And that panic attack, was kind of screaming at me. It wasn't just like the physical symptoms of heavy breathing and shaking. And it was an inner voice that said to me, so you want to do this for another 25 years? Is that really how you want to live? And that thought of having to be in that rat race, in that always having to prove myself for another 25 years, only increased the panic attack. But at the same time, it also sobered me. There was just something that, it's almost like this stepping away and saying, okay, this is how my future will look like if I continue this. This cannot be it. And even though, nothing immediately happened, it always stuck in the back of my mind. And I think it was a driving force to make a lot of the changes. And one of the changes, talking about meditation, was that I got into Kundalini yoga just by accident, and meditation. And that really just, shifted my relationship to myself, because for the first time in the practice of yoga, in the practice of the meditation, I respected myself. I looked at myself as worthy just for who I am and not for what I do and what I produce. So this, the belief, the core belief, you're only what you accomplish. You're only acceptable if you're number one or whatever those things are. That really was shifted into I am enough. And that didn't last very long. I don't know about your experience with meditation, but when I did, an hour and a half were these sessions usually, and afterwards, for at least 5 minutes, I felt really, really good. But after 5 minutes, I went right back into my anxiety and stress mode. But I kept on going because that feeling good was so new, that was so different. And then I kept on working on it, and eventually it was half an hour, and that was huge. And so just
so we have a couple
really
things in common. We have a couple things in common, Friedemann. Here's my experience. The first physical symptom that I was shown was this right here, shingles. I got shingles all over my face.
Oh, wow.
And then this is me in the emergency room. And after my third panic attack that I thought I was freaking dying. And I had a very similar revelation to what you had. I was like, this is going to be my life if I don't do something dramatically different right now. And honestly, I mean, I don't know if your experience was the same. Mine was like, this is a life and death moment for me. I either have to take a left turn immediately, or I mean, listen, I had plenty of, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles. I could see where this was headed if I didn't start to make a shift in my life. And it became critically important for me to do so. Dave, is there anything you want to add to what Friedemann was talking about?
It's kind of a difference between running from something and running towards something, right? So when you have a lot of anxiety in the background and you're running away from whatever that invisible thing is, there's no way to escape from that anxiety. And then there's no satisfaction when you accomplish things either, right? So you can set a goal and run toward it. And then you finally get there and it's like, okay, well, it's not enough. I think once you go through that transformation and you come to some baseline acceptance of, I'm okay the way I am right now, and not okay in a mediocre sort of way. Things are good. Things are fine the way they are right now. Now that things are fine, how do we build on this and how do we make it better? Right? So now your motivation toward improvement is completely different. It's not I have to do this to try to just barely come up to par. It's moving towards something because there's an abundance there and you want to see things improve and not only improve for yourself, but improve for the people that are around you, people that you can also lift up as well.
Well, I'm going to put this up on the screen. This is something that I pass out to people when I speak. If you're wondering, what does taking care of myself look like? What are things that I can do? Any one of these things, I think, can lend itself to a great self-care strategy. And, there's physical pieces of this. There's lifestyle changes you can make. There's mental changes you can do. There's spiritual practices. There's the social element to this thing. But, as I like to say when I'm out in front of people, is like, there has really never been a better time to heal and work on yourself because we just have so many resources, i.e. the guy that we're talking to right now, right? There's a book that he's literally written about how we can step into our full potential. And I want to start to wind down our conversation with this bit about the subconscious mind. And maybe that's too big of a can of worms to open up as we wind down. Which I recognize that it might be. But if you could give us the 30,000 foot viewpoint of the subconscious mind and tell us what you know about it, Friedemann.
Well, I believe that the subconscious mind turned out to be my best friend, but I didn't really understand it. I mean, for me, the subconscious is, there is this analogy of the iceberg. The conscious mind is a little piece that looks out there, and then under the surface, under the water, there is this massive amount of mind that is operating in so many ways, and we are not really necessarily either appreciating it or aware of it. But when we really think about it, there are so many things we do subconsciously or unconsciously, whether it's, our automatic movements like driving the car and we're totally somewhere else, but someone is still stopping at the red light, or even brushing teeth. I mean, there are times when I'm so not present that I wonder if I just washed my hair or not. So I have to really touch, oh yeah, it's wet. Okay, I did it. I mean, so there are things that, the subconscious just does as a servant. I see the subconscious also as a source of our core beliefs and, those value systems that we're not logically explaining, but we just have, taken on at some point in our mind. A lot of our memories are in the subconscious. They get unlocked when they get triggered. I mean, for me, one example is cigar smoke. Whenever I smell cigar smoke, immediately the image of my grandfather comes to mind. So those things that, we just really live with and make life meaningful and colorful are not our intellect. They are not our rational thinking. They are the more deeper, visceral, emotional aspects. And that's certainly, a lot of doing of the subconscious mind. And I don't know if it's totally true, but some say that, 80% of our daily activities are run by the subconscious if you take the belief systems and the emotions and so on, what drives us into consideration. And I think that's a lot. So I didn't like my subconscious mind because I thought, okay, a lot of the, let's say, OCD pattern and also my anxiety comes from the subconscious. And then I have nightmares all the time. So that must be really a bad thing. And when I turned around and saw the subconscious more as a faithful ally, just ultimately wants to make sure that we are okay, but it also has still, in some ways, the old playbook from our childhood as a reference sheet and hasn't really been updated. I really got curious about what can we do to update our subconscious? How can we make our subconscious see the world through the eyes of an adult and not through the eyes of a child? And the one concept that I think was life-changing for me when I got into the idea that my anxiety could look like Little Peanut Pan. And Little Peanut Pan was me being 5 years old, unable to express my real name. So I called myself Peanut Pan. So everyone called me Peanut Pan. And I was an anxious child. And whenever I was anxious, imagined that this is more like the child inside of me being scared or triggered. And I was cute. I mean, believe it or not, I was actually really cute. So when I saw the anxiety as that cute little kid, all of a sudden I wasn't really feeling the anxiety, but more the compassion for this kid as a predominant feeling. And so this is one way also to get a little distance from the anxiety, just to realize that there is something on the subconscious level that is not all you, that is not all your identity, but something deeper that in that moment, get activated or get scared and needs a little love and compassion. And that changed a lot for me, for sure.
I love that. It's such a great thing for people to hear is like the next time the anxiety shows up, don't get annoyed by it. Look at like the little kid where it all started and develop some compassion. There's a lot of talk about inner child work right now. And that sounds like it's a distant cousin or maybe even a closer cousin to it.
Totally.
Yeah. Dave, what do you want to add to that discussion?
The bright light in all of this is that, as much as the unconscious does run 80% of what we do during the day, it's reprogrammable, right? So you can program new patterns into it that then become the automatic thing that you do every day and the automatic way that you look at things every day, right? If it wasn't reprogrammable, then it'd be a pretty doomy situation. But it is possible to reprogram it and to get patterns that are more better serving of what you need during the day and are more balanced with what the reality is.
Are there, as we wrap up here, what are the easier ways or the first step ways to start to reprogram the mind? Because it sounds like a big project.
Yeah, it's kind of big.
Yeah,
but
is there something?
Awareness of patterns is
Okay.
the first step. If you don't see it, you can't change it.
All right. That's fair.
Yeah. I do believe that, just watching the self-talk and being aware that a lot of the self-talk is not something that we are necessarily wanting to think, but it just bubbles up and and seeing those bubbling up thoughts also as, a point to say, okay, let's just address that. Because if my thoughts shape how I see myself in the world, what if I reprogram my thoughts so that I see myself in the world differently? It doesn't have to be every thought. I find it just 2 a day, 3 a day of those recurring ones that they're showing up all the time. That already sets things into motion. And I think that's a good, just a little good routine to have.
Yeah, stop and question it.
Yeah.
I always screw this up. Do you always screw this up? Is there were there other factors? Like, is it that you're a bad person, or were there other things that were going on? Did you have a lot of things going on your mind at the time? Or do other people kind of react similarly in situations, that you're not like the only one that's doing this? I think it's okay to stop and question that. And that starts to, create a space where you can take a look at some of those patterns, and instead of it just being automatically accepting, well, this is just how it is. Well, wait a second, maybe it could be different. And you have to, start by looking at it and giving yourself permission to look at it.
Listen, I know it's easy to look at these two guys who are doctors and know a bunch of shit and think, well, they're doctors. Of course they got this figured out. Friends, I'm a radio DJ for 28 years. And I can tell you that anybody can put this stuff into practice. If I can do it, anybody can do this. And the amount of freedom that's waiting for people on the other side of some of these self-discoveries is incredible. The way that you can feel about yourself, the way that you can feel about your life, the way that you can look at your spouse again and your kids again, and the relationship that you had with your folks that maybe wasn't so sunshine and rainbows. Like, all of that stuff is up for grabs again, and you really can reprogram the way that you think about yourself and the life that you're leading. But you have to, and this is the one common denominator, you have to start. It's Dave's not going to do it for you. Friedemann's not going to do it for you. I can't do it for you. You have to make the choice that you're finally ready for it. And I think we've said this several times on the podcast before. Like, for some people, unfortunately, it takes a massive life event before they wake the F up and they start to do something different. Some people are so dumb that they have to get shingles all over their face and they have to go to the emergency room for panic attacks before they wake up and they realize what needs to go down. But whatever it takes, I would encourage each and every person to take the first step. And I would say to you, Friedemann, your book here, I feel like with this interview we had today, we got the tip of the iceberg there. And there's this whole thing sitting underneath the surface that I would encourage people to go and look at. I'm sure you would recommend that everybody start with the fear and anxiety solution, since it sounds like it's kind of step one in the process, and then jump into the empowerment solution, and then keep coming back to learn from people who lived it, to kind of like sharpen that saw, as Dave said, because we're constantly having these conversations about how we can do better for ourselves and the people around us. Any final thoughts from you, Dave? And then I'm going to give Friedemann a chance to give us some final thoughts.
It's not about making big changes necessarily. It's about little things done consistently over a long period of time. And that's where you're going to see the growth. I think people get discouraged sometimes where they take a look at their situation and, oh my gosh, this is too big. I can never get a handle on it. Start with anything. Start with any small thing and move from there and develop kind of a enjoyment over seeing positive changes in little ways and take encouragement in those little steps, because over time it's where it makes a big difference.
Friedemann, last words from you.
Well, I totally agree with that. And I think just to add that, when we are changing, sometimes what happens, I see this with my clients, that they are changing something, but then they're immediately shifting to the 5 other things they haven't changed yet. And that becomes then the focus. And for our mind, especially our subconscious, I find the subconscious needs positive reinforcement. It needs the feeling of, well done. This is great. This is what I want, and more of it. So whatever changes you have been making, whatever small progress you have celebrated, really acknowledge, yes, I can do it. Wow, this is great. And don't believe that you become complacent. No, you become actually more motivated, and your subconscious or your mind will even more feel encouraged that we can do more. Because that's what you also said, Mathew, that we are all more powerful and capable than we give ourselves credit for. And I think there is so much more in life for us than we probably have accepted. So it's just a matter of taking responsibility and then taking the first step.
Love it. Thank you, gentlemen, for a great conversation today. I always love it when three dudes get on a show and share their feelings. It makes me happy. And no, I'm really grateful for your time. And Friedemann will encourage everybody to get the book. I am going to be downloading this sucker as soon as we hang up and start to really dive into this, because this is the stage that I'm at in my life. It's like all I'm focused on now is unlocking this stuff. Now that I've uncovered that now that I've seen that big iceberg underneath, I'm just like, I'm an addict almost. It's maybe not even healthy. I don't care. But I'm so focused on making my life as good as it can be. And I have people like you to think about it.
Get the audiobook, because I was reading the audiobook and it's definitely something that adds to it, because there are some deeper processes which I guide through. So it's way easier than reading it. So
well, listen, I don't like to read anyway, so thank you.
Do that, exactly.
Dr. Dave, thank you very much for your time today.
Great to be here, and great conversation today.
Yeah, I agree. And Friedemann, be well and keep the peace, man.
I will try. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1. To help you feel less alone. 2. Encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3. When you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.